Okay, Sarah is a certified human design reader and Reiki practitioner. Her greatest joy and passion is to introduce these modalities to others who are ready to take the next step in their own personal journeys of alignment and self-discovery. Sarah, so I would love to know, how did you get into human design?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. I'm super excited as well to share. And how I got into human design was about 6 years ago. I had a mentor. At the time, I was in a hardware company and was totally not open to this idea. I had never heard of it. And I had a mentor who actually introduced me to the gene keys, which is sort of a deeper rabbit hole than human design. And she was like, you have, this specific gate in your chart. We have to work together. And I didn't really understand what she was talking about, but it got me interested, and I started studying. I started reading a lot about gene keys. The founder of Gene Keys worked alongside the founder of human design. And so that led me into looking at human design. And more, as I learned about it, I realized how much it applied in my day-to-day life when I learned about my design. And then as I began sharing with others, how that really helped them learn about who they were, how they make decisions, how they communicate and show up. And yeah, it just kind of happened, I guess, over the years.
That's awesome. So I'm guessing most people will not know what human design is. So if you can just tell us what it is and maybe a little about the history of how it came about.
Yeah, so human design, it takes into consideration a lot of different modalities. It's looking at the Chinese I Ching and the 64 hexagrams, the Tree of Life and Kabbalah, the chakra system, astrology. And while it was founded in 1987 by Rao Hu, it's actually something that's based on, modalities that are coming from thousands of years ago. And so it takes into consideration all these different wisdoms. And when you take it all in and you go to look at your chart, it sort of has this weird looking combo of numbers, which are the 64 hexagrams. It's got the chakra system. The astrology part is more about the magnetic fields and sort of the planetary alignment when you physically were born, as well as the planetary alignment when your soul came into the womb. So there's different parts of your conscious and unconscious self represented in a chart. And then also with human design, I think what's important to remember is that it's sort of the study of the aura and the hologram. So if we're all a hologram, we're all very much part of the same, but very different. So there are 5 different human design types, but within that, there are billions of different charts. So personally, every time I look at a chart, it's like looking at a totally different person. So it makes it really interesting.
That's awesome. And so what about the history of human design? You said that, you worked with the founder of it. So it must be a pretty recent science, I believe.
Yeah. So I personally did not work directly with the founder. My mentor, she worked directly with the founder of Gene Keys, which is Richard Rudd, or who is Richard Rudd. And Richard Rudd worked directly with the founder of human design. So I didn't work directly with him. He actually has passed away, but he came about human design, or sort of channeled work in 1987. And he was a manifester. If those of you who are familiar with human design, he sort of had the channel 2343, which is very much all about having very unique insights, and then the ability to describe the insights that were coming in for him from a place of like non-emotion. And so he's able to detach the emotion and share this information. And so it did resonate with some people, and then some people, it didn't necessarily resonate. And now today, we're looking at it in 2020, and more people are coming and learning or hearing about human design. It's something that I think similar to Reiki, which I also practice, where 10 years ago, people didn't really know what it was. And now it's popping up and people are seeing this as another alternative modality, or I like to call it another tool that you can just add to your toolbox to use.
That's awesome. I love that you mentioned the concept of a toolbox. So what would one kind of use human design for? As in, specifically, what type of questions would human design help one answer?
Yeah. So what's really interesting about human design is as humans, there's a lot of conditioning, societal conditioning. As a society, we have lived in this hierarchical system. We've had this sort of corporate work structure for so long, and we've had a lot of conditioning that we've gone through. So human design is something that can really help us understand our own energy, understand how do we communicate, how do we make decisions, how do we show up. And what I mean by that, for example, if you have generator energy, if you're a generator or manifesting generator, you're really good at answering those binary yes no questions, those questions that come in that are sort of, do you want pizza today, do you want to go outside, and you feel like it's a yes or no. But then those thought-based questions that are more open-ended, those sort of questions that are, you know, yes, they're those sort of questions that are more open, where it's like, what do you want to do today? What do you think about this project? Those sort of questions can be a little bit more challenging for generator energy because they're not designed to answer those questions in that way. And so a lot of times when we learn just how do we communicate with, for example, generator energy, knowing that they communicate this way, then they can reframe questions that are open-ended. Or when they're communicating with a manifester or a projector, they can actually ask them, hey, what do you think about this project? And they'll be able to receive an answer to an open-ended question. So I think what's really unique is we can learn how to work together and how to communicate based on the design types and not judge ourselves for not knowing how to answer, because we put a lot of judgment. A second thing here is about our energy. Generator energy is really conditioned to sort of people please and show up, and they create their own energy through the sacral. So they're a lot of times just going, and they will sometimes agree to do things at the expense of their own energy, not even realizing that it's not in alignment. And the projector and manifestor energy will also sometimes try to keep up with that 9 to 5 pace and work 8-hour days, where their design type is more about working in bursts and being okay with that. Work for 2 to 3 hours and then take a break and then work for another 2 to 3 hours. So just sort of, I would say human design is very confirming for a lot of people. They're like, yeah, I always do work better 2 to 3 hours at a time, but I felt judged and I felt like I needed to show up and be at my desk for 9 hours a day. And so I think it's really interesting is people can kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, this is how I'm designed. And when you live by your design, a lot more flow comes into your life naturally. So it's really cool.
That's really nice. I guess it's sort of like unpeeling the layers of what was put on you by society, you know, with the example of like, how should you be able to work? No, you should be able to work 9 to 5 or longer hours without taking long breaks. But, you know, for some people, it's kind of not how they work best. And, you know, human design is one of the tools to understand, I guess, energetically or like planetarily, how were you designed, to help you understand like, oh, actually, let me maybe try working 2 or 3 hours at a time, or approaching, you know, this person or this situation in a different way. So it's sort of another way to like see the different options that you could try and see if it fits better for you.
Yeah, I think it's definitely exactly like that. And even this time in quarantine, it's been very interesting. I keep saying it's the time of the projectors because they're finally able to embrace sort of their own schedule. They're able to work for 2 to 3 hours and take a break and not feel like they're being judged for doing that. So they're able to actually show up a lot better. And there's even parts, you know, the intricacies of the design. Once you get to your design type, there's also 12 different profiles. There's different gates that will be highlighted in each chart. That's what makes the charts unique and different channels. And so even some people, they operate on a totally different 24-hour cycle. And so for them, they might be operating from 2 a.m. to 11 a.m., but that's not convenient in what society has dictated should be normal. Society is so linear and we're not linear, especially I know that you're a manifesting generator and you're meant to do so many things. And there's this conditioning sort of, oh, I shouldn't be so scattered. I should be focusing on one thing. And society has done so much to make us feel like we need to be small and not embrace those unique aspects of ourselves.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for telling me all of that. So I would love to know, how have you seen understanding one's human design help for example, your clients with various kind of mental health conditions. So for example, how have you seen it help with anxiety?
Yeah. So anxiety actually, we have different energy centers, just like the chakra system. In human design, there are 9 energy centers, and two specific energy centers, or I would say three, I'll talk about the root, the solar plexus, and the spleen. These really play a big role on our energy. And so if we look at the root, if you have this defined in your chart, if it's colored in, then you're really good at working under pressure, and you're able to, like, that's what feeds you, that's what motivates you. You can make your own momentum, you can create that for yourself. But if you have this open in your chart and you're in a job that's very much pressure oriented, you have a manager who's asking for updates every day, and you're feeling pressure, that's going to cause, that stress or that worry or that anxiety. And so a lot of people with an open root, they try to force themselves to do better, perform better, and they don't really understand why they're experiencing burnout or adrenal fatigue, which is governed in the root chakra. So just even having that knowledge of, oh, I'm not meant to work under pressure, stop putting myself in those situations. If we look at the solar plexus in the chart, so about half the population have this defined and half have it open. And so when it's defined, it's sort of a defined emotion. And people with a defined solar plexus, emotionally, they can see someone upset on the bus, but they don't take it in with them. And those with the open solar plexus, they are considered the non-emotionals, but they're actually the ones that mirror and magnify the emotions around them. They have a very open aura. And so just being in the grocery store or seeing someone upset on a bus ride, they will feel that heavy energy and they might take it with them into their office or into their home. And so that can also cause that anxiety or that stress. And I always tell people, just like you take your shoes off when you come into the house, energetically just think about it and just take off any energy. Don't bring the grocery store line with you into your house. Don't bring the stressful bus into your house. Just be aware that you are not responsible for those emotions you're feeling. And the last energy center, the spleen in human design, it's sort of described as our oldest chakra. It's all about survival, our fight, flight, our yes, no instincts. And so if you have this defined, you have very set sort of fears that are defined based on the different gates you might have in that section of your chart. And I always like to think of the fears as the superpowers. So a lot of people dealing with anxiety and stress, they'll have the pressure of running out of time, or the fear of the past repeating itself, or feeling that they're inadequate or they're not qualified to be in the position they're in. And I always say, well, with those sort of feelings or those fears, there's actually superpowers. You have an attunement for time then, or you actually know how to see the future in a way or predict what's going to happen next. You're able to spot those trends because you have that fear of the past repeating itself, or bring something new to the table when you're not necessarily having all those qualifications that society has dictated that you have to have on you. And again, if you have this open in your chart where naturally you're not going to have those anxieties, you won't have those fears, it can become highlighted based on the energy we're in front of. So I think the biggest part is understanding how much we're actually affected by the energy around us, even when it's not direct, even when we're just happen to be on a bus, or again, because of this strange time in quarantine, I always use the grocery store line example because that's pretty much the hot spot where we are in front of people. And a lot of anyone with the open solar plexus or open spleen on their own, they're very cool and calm. They're not feeling necessarily like high emotions, but then they'll go out for a walk in the park and they'll come home and they'll feel that stress. And so I think there's a lot to be said about, okay, understanding what parts of your chart are affected by the energy. Where are you mirroring and magnifying energy that's not yours?
So here I have a question. So let's say that, your design is that you actually get quite anxious because you take on other people's energy. But I guess, is there a way to work with that human design, helps with? Because, what if you want to continuously be surrounded by a lot of people, or it's just necessary?
Of course. So within the solar plexus, which is usually where a lot of that sort of anxiety or stress comes from, there's 4 different emotional waves. And so when you look at a chart, you can see the most inner wave is considered the subtle wave. And then it goes into the buildup, the escalator, and the spontaneous wave of emotion. So there's kind of like 4 levels in human design of emotions. So first of all, getting really familiar with, did you have sort of a peak, like a very much a reaction that was sort of an emotional reaction that was very like quick and snappy, or was it, a buildup where every 2 weeks you kind of see in your chart, you can kind of see if you have that defined. You can see if, even if you have a hanging gate there and it's not a channel, certain energy might complete that, kind of like a energetic plug. If you have that buildup wave, it will almost be sort of, okay, every 2 weeks, I know that I'm going to have sort of an emotional heavy day, and I can recognize that in myself, and you can almost track it perfectly. People who have the buildup wave. If it's the escalator wave, it's almost sort of, Monday was a hard day, Tuesday was a hard day, but then like Wednesday was a completely difficult, hard day. And so it's really interesting when we start to, if we journal and we sort of track our emotions. An example I have of this was a partnership reading I did where both partners had a defined solar plexus and both had a buildup wave defined in their specific chart. And so they were never going to necessarily see eye to eye on each other's emotions because they're so defined. They have their own way of emotionally working with themselves. And so someone in that partnership could be every 2 weeks having an emotion where they need to just have a day where they're by themselves and let emotion out. And then others, maybe it's once every month. So I actually recommended that they use the smiley face method, which is what I call it, where they have a journal in their kitchen, and then in the morning they just write down, what type of smiley face they feel in the morning and then at night. And then they actually, over a course of a few months, we're able to see that they have a pattern. We don't really think about that. Patterns of emotion. We just think, oh, it's an emotional day. But if we track it, you can actually be like, okay, next Tuesday, this might be a heavier day. And you can actually then mentally prepare for it and change your mindset about it. And maybe, for example, in that partnership, a partner would know, like, okay, I'm not going to discuss a difficult topic today because it's going to be one of those days that might be more difficult. Instead, I'm going to make sure I make dinner, or I'm going to make sure that I do something for them that's special. So, yeah.
Awesome. That's amazing. So I guess moving on to other types of conditions that human design could be helpful with, how have you seen it help your clients with depression, for example?
Yeah, I think, again, so the big aspect is the reaffirmation that they're not, what they're working on or what comes to them is not necessarily out of line. There's a lot of conditioning. So if I look at manifestors, their strategy, they are here to initiate. And so many manifestors shrink themselves and sort of don't tell people about their ideas because, as sort of, if we go to childhood, the conditioning of a manifestor, maybe they had all these ideas and they wanted to initiate different projects, but then they were shut down, or they were considered sort of different or not in line with what everybody else was doing. So a lot of times there's this shrinking aspect. And for example, a manifestor, it's when they have those spontaneous urges that they can't explain why they want to go after what they want to go after. That's the signal from the universe to go after it and to sort of not worry about trying to explain and trying to tell everyone what they're working on, but to really just go initiate and just trust that the right people are always going to show up. Versus, for example, if we look at projectors, they're kind of the opposite. They're very similar to a manifestor, but their strategy is to wait for the invitation. So many projectors will feel misunderstood, like nobody understands them. And then when they get invited, that's when their aura sort of works, where it's very much piercing. It's very much one-on-one with the person in front of them. And so I always say, you can ask for the invitation. If you want to share something, just ask people like, hey, can I share my opinion, or can I share my thoughts, or do you have a moment for me to add something to this idea? And so I really think it comes down to understanding which type you are, and then your strategy, and then also you're not self-themed. So for example, a manifestor energy will feel angry, projector energy will feel bitterness, generator energy, frustration. And so it's also recognizing, like, okay, when am I feeling frustrated? What am I trying to force that is not in alignment? Where am I saying yes to something that actually it should be a no? And I'm just trying to people please, and I don't want to face the actual confrontation. Because when we start to honor our own strategy and we recognize when the universe is trying to redirect us through our not self theme, then we can get back on track.
Awesome. So it gives you a lot of the tools to self-heal through alignment, both to the energies that are actually aligned with you and also understanding what is in misalignment and kind of move away from those. That's awesome. I guess moving on to sort of how has human design helped your clients with their spiritual journey and personal development?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting is a lot of people, they've never really heard about what human design is. And sometimes I'll be offering free readings at an event or something, and some people think I'm going to read their palms, or some people they'll ask, are you going to be able to tell me when I'm going to get married or predict the future for me, or am I compatible with my partner? And I think what's first of all really important to mention is that there is no such thing as compatible or not compatible. There is no predicting, your future in a chart. You can kind of see the patterns that your soul chose to experience in this lifetime, as well as to teach in this lifetime through a chart, but it's nothing like those other modalities. And I'm definitely not channeling, even though I'll be able to tell a lot about someone just by looking at it. It's definitely not it's not sort of me channeling or predicting. It is based on sort of a pseudoscience. But when we look at, when I work with clients with the spirituality aspect of it, there's, I think, a lot to be said around sort of understanding their energy and coming back and remembering we are energetic beings. And so when they have parts of the chart that are open, being more aware of those specific centers for them. And I think what's great about human design is it kind of just provides a really nice framework and a map to understand. So for example, in a chart, you can look and see if someone is big picture oriented or if someone is more detail oriented. You can tell if someone is really good and sort of thrives on routine and if their environment is important for them, or if they're more of a non-routine person and they like to change things up. And so being able to give those confirmations to clients where they'll be like, yeah, I've been trying to do a morning routine, but it never works out. And they keep trying to force something that's just their design isn't necessarily meant to be that way. I think it helps them kind of realize that. And what I like to include with the spiritual aspect is about manifestation. How do we manifest? Because there's different types of ways of doing that. And society has conditioned us to believe that manifestation is either it's very woo-woo and it's not a real thing. It's sort of that spectrum all the way up to you need to do affirmations, mantras, and vision boards. And it's sort of like, it always talks about you doing the self-work to manifest. And I'm a big believer in actually getting your crew to manifest with you. Like, we're so good at manifesting for others because as a collective we're meant to work together. And so if you want to manifest, let's say, an apartment, it's about not just going in and like visualizing and creating your dream vision board, but it's about talking and having your other people in your energy help you. If someone has an open throat, so the throat center is specifically about manifestation, they're really good at speaking on behalf of others. And so they're able to really pimp out your manifestation. If you have an idea, if you have a closed throat and you're like, oh, I really want this apartment, but then you tell all your friends with those open throat centers, they're able to really expand and like bring more energy to the item or thing or whatever you're looking to manifest. And I think remembering that, and that does go a lot into the law of attraction and how do we bring good energy to things and concentrate and focus. The universe doesn't know positive from negative, so how do we make sure we stay in alignment with our energy, which creates a higher vibration, which again then sort of things flow. And I tell people to start small. Just think about a sweater that you really like and send that sweater photo out to a few friends and ask them if they like that sweater, what they think about it. And then sort of energetically, maybe it becomes 70% off, or maybe a friend bought the same sweater, doesn't fit them, and they're going to gift it to you. And it's kind of like the universe has funny ways of sort of fulfilling the manifestations. Like, we can't really predict that, but that's what keeps it interesting in a way. And I think that coming from my own background, I studied physics. I worked in a neuroscience lab at Stanford as my first job. I worked in software for the past 3 years. And so I wasn't necessarily the typical, what you would imagine as spiritual person. And so I'm able to understand in the corporate world when I work with clients, where are they coming from on their spiritual journey? Because we all are on different waves and you cannot just knock on someone and wake them up to the whole world. It's kind of, we're all on our own process.
I'm so glad that you brought up work and sort of, being able to, I guess, have a better understanding of people that you work with. And so
Mhm.
I was wondering, could you share maybe a story of a client or maybe yourself that that kind of helped you resolve a conflict or kind of a situation in a work setting because you had the knowledge of human design?
So a lot of, I feel like there's always an interesting client story. Two stories specifically come to mind for me. One is a projector story where I did a client's reading, and she is a project manager that works with 5 software engineers who are all either manifesting generator or generator energy. And so she's a projector, and fundamentally the way she communicates and makes decisions is very different from the binary generator energy, which is very much sort of yes, no. And so she always felt like whenever she would share what she thought about something, that she was forcing it. And she didn't feel like she was forcing it, but she felt like it didn't hit anyone well. People would just hear her, and then maybe someone else would make the same suggestion a few minutes later, and they would hear them, but they didn't hear what she had to say. And so this is because energetically, projectors, they need to be having that invitation to open it up for discussion, to be able to have that energetically take away that hierarchical, which is the manifestor, just sort of forcing an opinion. And so anytime that she was trying to force her thought, because projectors naturally see things so differently, and they're actually what I call the best secret sauce you can have to a team, because they literally just see things so differently, and so it can be super valuable. And so as I told her that she can invite herself into a invitation, and I told her that just, next time you want to share something, don't just share it, but actually ask if you can share it. I say, hey, that sounds like a great idea, but can I share my thoughts on this project, or can I share what I want to bring to the table? And when she started to sort of ask for that invitation and then opened the door where her colleagues were then able to say, yeah, what are your thoughts? And they're inviting her energetically to share her thoughts. All of a sudden, they were able to listen. And for, months, she had been working in this environment where she felt like she was misunderstood. Her colleagues felt like she was a little bit bossy and that she was trying to just be smart about everything. They didn't really understand that, like, actually, she sees things differently, and she wants to help towards the project. She's not trying to force it. So that was one of my favorite examples with the projector. And then if I look at another example, I was this week speaking to a professor and she's on her sabbatical this year. And she was saying how she's one of the most, like, she knows that she's one of the most sought after professors in her studies, and people really love her. And she's very well liked, but then she's the only one in her colleague group that doesn't have a PhD. And so she had this gate in her chart that was sort of that recurring theme of feeling inadequate, feeling like she doesn't have the right qualifications. And so she's always been beating herself up internally that she doesn't have a PhD, and her colleagues treat her or look at her differently. They feel like she's not, and it's all a story in her head, because her ratings, she is the most, and she knows if she looks, at the results or all the feedback, she knows she's a very popular and well-liked teacher, but then she felt so judged. And this judgment actually was an internal story she was having with herself, that I was able to look and see that this is a pattern that she's repeating, that her soul decided to have, and sort of shed light on the fact that it's awesome that you don't have a PhD, because you actually, the way you teach is so unique and different. That's what makes people want to learn from you, and not from maybe another professor that's more traditional and has that PhD. And I think that really just shed a lot of it just was really helpful for her to understand, because again, she already knew this about herself, but she didn't realize it's actually a big part of her chart, that she was always going to feel like she needed to have this degree. So yeah.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people struggle with some form of that or another. Let's switch gears a little bit. I would love to know more about your practice, I guess about the mission in particular.
Yeah, so for me, my dream is that in 5 to 10 years, you'd be able to show your chart to your manager or your friend or your partner and be like, hey, I'm not really suited to work in a 9 to 5, or I actually work better in a coffee shop or from home, because look, my whole chart is wide open and I'm really affected by the energy around me. Or if we look at profiles, some profiles, they're super connectors and they're really good at connecting with people. So if I'm in a sales role, I want to be able to show my manager that, hey, the way I'm going to make the sales is not by contacting random leads on LinkedIn, but it's about me going to talk to strangers in person. And so my goal is, as I work more and more with corporate teams, is to shed this light, and so that people can work more efficiently and not sort of, again, try to force themselves into a dress that doesn't fit or a box that doesn't fit. They're just kind of like trying to be a cookie cutter. And that's really like, we're seeing a huge shift in consciousness in general, where we're breaking away the hierarchy in the corporate system. Projectors are the newest of the human design type, and that's one of their reasons sort of is to, like, by having that invitation, they're kind of breaking that away. And we're seeing more and more flat organizations, CEOs having conversations with all levels. We're kind of taking away that hierarchical distance.
Yeah.
So my mission is that the more people that learn about this, I kind of feel like if I can just have 10 people really get into human design, and then they share with their friends, and sort of that ripple effect, that's what would be my mission, just to get people to not apologize for who they are designed to be.
That's awesome. I mean, I just remember, I guess, kind of the only equivalent, I mean, it's not an equivalent, but something close to that I had in a work setting was the MBTI. As a consultant in McKinsey, and actually also in business school, they had us take the MBTI. And I think at McKinsey, they were actually taking that into account in a big way when putting teams together. And it was definitely part of the first initial, like, sort of team kickoff, where everybody shared about their MBTI type and, you know, what that said about their desired way of working in a team or working, you know, independently. How would they would want to work with the client? So I think that definitely helped shed some light to just improving team dynamics and also just like personal efficiency in the workplace. So I think that's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of what is the step-by-step client experience? What happens when someone wants to work with you?
Yeah, so I work with clients in a few different ways. If someone is having a deep dive reading with me, this is probably the most traditional way to work with me, where it's a client who, they kind of heard about human design. Maybe I do a 15-minute free readings where people can get a taste of what it is, and then they want to deep dive. They want to look at every aspect of their chart. So this is something that it takes place these days over Zoom. It's recorded, and I go through every aspect of the chart, and it's just sort of a general overview of the entire chart. I also do business consulting, where sometimes I'll have a client that they're trying to start a company, or they're trying to, you know, overcome something that's going on in their workplace, and we'll do a general reading, but then we'll look at specific parts of their chart. You know, everybody's chart has different aspects highlighted, and we'll kind of look at that, and I'll provide journal questions or exercises. I come from a background where I started 2 companies and then I worked in software. So I have a lot of sort of strange business savvy experience that's not related to human design that I'm able to incorporate just from, I guess I've been my own best guinea pig. And I know when I learned about my human design type, I was able to really let go of a lot of things that I really struggled with the conditioning of society of, this is how you have to do things, you have to go this route, and then realizing, like, oh, actually, let me try based on my design. And then things were just so much easier for me when I stopped trying to force. And then I think my favorite is working with teams. So working in a group setting with 6 to 12 teammates, and we don't go in like the super deep dive personal aspects, but we look at, okay, who are the detail oriented, who are the big picture, who are the people that operate on their own pattern of time, and who are the people that actually they might prefer to work in an office space that's more structured, and being able to just shed some of that general light, and so that I can help teams become more efficient, more productive, more accepting and understanding. For example, if someone has an open G center, I might realize that, okay, I'm going to give them a few extra minutes because maybe they got caught up in the present moment and they forgot where their keys are, so they're looking for that. And so I would be able to give a little bit more compassion and not feel like, oh my gosh, this person's never on time, they're always late, they're always missing their paperwork. I actually can see in their design like, oh, well, let's build some systems and help you make sure that you're not wasting a lot of time forgetting where you're going, because it's just that they don't have a direction defined in their chart. And so their whole lives, they're like, I've heard such funny and crazy stories with people with the OpenG Center. And it's like, okay, well, this is the person on the team who always loses the paperwork before a conference. So how do we make sure that it's, you know, it's not a bad thing, but maybe someone with a defined G Center is going to be in charge of the conference materials, things like that. So those are the ways, I guess. And the last one, as you know, is the master class, which this is, I think, the best for people who want to really learn about human design and learn not just about themselves, but all the other types. And this is really popular with business coaches or people who want to be able to elevate their own clients. Maybe they don't want to become a human design reader. They could read a chart after my masterclass, but they could also just start to use it however they want to. Again, it's another tool to add to whatever they might have.
That's awesome. I guess my kind of conclusive question for you would be around other modalities that you have seen work, maybe for yourself and for your clients as well. Sort of, I think what we're trying to do with these kind of series of interviews is to give people kind of an understanding of various modalities to help them, you know, in their healing for anxiety, depression, and also in their like personal development, spiritual journey. And so it would be great to hear sort of if there's something that you really liked for yourself and also what you've seen work for your clients.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a huge believer in what I call healing beyond convention and going into the unconventional healing modalities, because I think especially in the US, it's so easy to just, you know, you're having crazy dreams or you're not sleeping well, so you just take a sleeping pill for that, or you take these antidepressants that just block out all emotions, and then you're kind of like on this weird stimulated high all the time, but it's not you. And so how can you not just get rid of the symptom but actually find the solution? So I think human design is a good way to just like map out and understand yourself. And then I am a huge fan of Reiki practice. On my own, I am a Reiki practitioner. I'm not a Reiki master. I've done levels 1 through 3. And I think just even with people who have a lot open in their chart, if you're a reflector, for example, and your entire chart is completely open, then even just doing up to level 2 attunement, which kind of adds this layer, this energetic layer of protection, you won't take in as much energy. You'll kind of be protected by that Reiki energy. And Reiki energy is something that even when I first was introduced to it, I thought it was so weird. And I was actually afraid when I met my first energy healer. I thought that she was going to cast a spell on me. And so I'm literally coming from like a non-open background. And after like 9 different signs from the universe, literally people like strangers asking me if I was a Reiki healer or people telling me I should do Reiki, I finally was like, okay, I'm just going to book it like a massage. I'm going to pay $100 and go to this guy and go find out what is Reiki. And I remember even the Reiki person asking me, okay, what do you want to heal? And I didn't even know. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing there. It's just it's crazy how many people ask me if I do Reiki or I practice. And I studied physics and it doesn't make sense to me, this idea. So I started to get into Reiki through that. And I really realized that even in the morning to give yourself Reiki, if you even just do level 1, I always tell people, like, you don't need to go on and become a Reiki practitioner just because you study it. And so I think Reiki is one of the most powerful things that you can, again, it's like you could be at a party, someone's not feeling well, and because you've maybe been attuned for Reiki, you can actually help that person get over a headache or get over stress. And Reiki is something in level 2, you learn all about how to protect yourself psychologically, emotionally, as well as physically. So I think Reiki is one of those things that is lesser known, but is something that is becoming more popular. I would say it's probably similar to how acupuncture is becoming more popular, though I have not actually personally tried acupuncture yet. And then a modality that I have seen my mentor, I was in the room while she was getting a couple of sessions done, was cranial sacral. And I hope someday to study this, but this work is you know, it's combining also some Reiki energy, but also so much more, and the movement of the body. And I think when people look at their human design and their energy centers and then combine it with a modality that has to do with aligning, turns out Reiki's not scary. There's no such thing as negative Reiki, so don't be afraid. Um, but yeah, I would say Reiki is a big one.
That's awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and sharing so much about your journey and how human design can be helpful